Today, we're going to try and understand the immense, almost unimaginable pressure that young people in China are facing. We're going to follow their journey through a system where it feels like every single path has turned into a frantic, high-stakes competition.
This one question, from our source material, just gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? It captures this deep anxiety that, in the mad rush to get ahead, has the simple act of just taking a walk, exploring life without some competitive goal. Has that become totally impossible?
And that feeling, that sense that there's no room to just walk, brings us to the core metaphor for this whole experience, the racetrack.
So the term they use is racetrack, or 赛道, and it has become a word for everything. We're not just talking about jobs here. As our source points out, even academic pursuits, like studying the classical poet Li Bai, are now seen as crowded racetracks. It feels like every possible path is just jammed with competitors.
And this really captures the psychological weight of it all. The feeling isn't just that it's competitive, but that it's treacherous. The stakes are so incredibly high that one tiny misstep feels like it could lead to a permanent dead end. There's just zero room for error.
So how did this feeling get so baked into the system? Well, the answer lies in what our source calls the great KPI machine.
Everything is driven by key performance indicators, or KPIs. This has created a world of what you might call instrumental rationality. Basically, a mindset where every single choice is calculated for maximum efficiency. Success isn't a feeling, it's a number, and that number can dictate life-altering decisions for both students and the schools they go to.
For high schools, the ultimate KPI is something called the Qingbai rate. This is their admission rate into China's two most elite universities, Tsinghua and Peking University. This one single number becomes the school's primary goal, its badge of honor.
And this obsession with metrics has a real human cost. There's this one devastating story from the source about a student who absolutely loved literature, but they were pushed into a nursing major just to help boost their high school's Qingbei rate. The person's dream was sacrificed for the institution's numbers.
And this logic, it just cascades all the way down. High schools chase the Qingbei rate. University professors are judged by how many papers they publish. And this pressure gets passed on to the students, who quickly learn to pick their courses based on which ones give the highest grades, not the ones they're actually curious about. At the end of the day, success becomes something you calculate, not something you feel.
Now you can imagine, this environment fundamentally changes how young people even think about their own futures. It's a huge shift from exploration to really just execution.
Yeah, this really shows the massive shift. The old way was called luanpeng, or bumping around, a messy, ambition-driven process of trial and error. But today's generation relies on the gonglei, which is basically the guidebook or the walkthrough. It's all about following a pre-optimized, risk-free path to success.
And these guidebooks are no joke. They are incredibly detailed. The source explains that for pretty much any goal, like getting into a specific PhD program, a student can find a step-by-step plan online that details every single move, from which classes to take to the exact email template to use when you contact professors. Absolutely nothing is left to chance.
But there's a huge consequence to all this optimization. It creates students who are incredibly diligent, really high achievers, but it can completely drain them of their genuine ambition. Their passion gets deconstructed into a checklist of tasks, and that original why, the spark that got them interested in the first place, it just gets lost along the way.
So what happens after all that effort? What happens when they follow the guidebook perfectly and they finally cross that finish line they'd been running towards their whole lives?
Well, this is where the emotional reality hits hard. There's this massive gap between the effort people put in and the satisfaction they get out. Years of their life, just immense energy and personal sacrifice, all poured into achieving one goal, but the emotional payoff is surprisingly tiny.
And this quote from our source explains why perfectly. In the internet age, young people have already seen everything. They've seen what success looks like a million times online. So when they finally get it for themselves after this grueling journey, the reality of it can feel, underwhelming. It was an objective they were told they should want, but the actual feeling of having it is just so-so.
Okay, so let's pull back for this last part. What kind of person does a system like this create? And what fundamental parts of being human might be getting lost in the process?
This timeline from the source shows a really striking and honestly heartbreaking progression. First-year university students show up, and they're full of all these diverse passions and dreams. By the second year, the pressure funnels their ambitions into two main racetracks: get into grad school or pass the civil service exam. And by the end, a student might confess that a simple love of reading makes them feel like an outcast in a world so obsessed with practical results.
Ultimately, this whole system is driven by fear. These are gifted, talented young people, but they become afraid to claim their own unique talents. They're told that following a personal passion, stepping off that main racetrack, is a risk that's both dangerous and profoundly lonely.
And this brings us to our final and maybe most crucial question. In a world of KPIs and guidebooks, what essential human needs are still there? Our source notes that even in this system, students still find profound meaning in things like classical poetry. And that suggests that there's a timeless need for beauty, for purpose, and for a sense of self that you just can't measure on any racetrack.